you find me dramatically lit and a little overstimulated. The reason for that is that I've had the chance to catch up with a dear old friend. Joel, meet everybody. Everybody meet Joel.
Hello, everybody.
Joel has a beautiful collection of guitars by Michael Greenfield out in Montreal, and he asked me to come to his home and film them, and he's very generously said that I can share the results with you too. So I've just finished filming Joel's G2, G3 and concert classical. Two of those instruments, the G3 and the classical guitar, I was playing for the very first time, and it was, I have to say, absolutely exhilarating. Well done, mate. Those are some spectacular guitars. And I thought while we had the cameras and the mics up, it might be an idea to have a bit of a conversation about something that's been on my mind for a while. And I thought that Joel would be an ideal sounding board for this. So I'd be really keen to get your input about ordering a bespoke guitar, an instrument specially for you, because this is something that you've done on several occasions. It's something that I talk a lot about on my channel, but it's always nice to bring in fresh faces and fresh ideas. So Joel, do you remember your first exposure to a Luthier-made instrument?
It was kind of self-inflicted. The way all this came about was I was watching TV, mm-hmm. and James Taylor came on TV.
Right.
And he was playing a guitar that I didn't recognise. Mm-hmm. Which sent me down a whole rabbit hole on the internet of what guitar is this? I've never seen it before.
Absolutely, I think you're not alone there.
No, and I liked, it was a different sound. It was a sound I hadn't heard before. I learned about James Olsen, which then prompted me to learn about other luthiers and trying to find out, what do these guitars sound like? Eventually, I stumbled upon Tony McManus.
Right.
Playing a G1 on Michael Greenfield's YouTube channel.
A legendary video.
Yeah. And I was just kind of stopped in my tracks and was like, that's the sound. And, it's an older video, so it didn't look like there was much kind of, trickery in production going on. Mm-hmm. It was very much a raw video. But the sound of the guitar just, blew me away. It was something I'd never heard before from a steel string. So that led me to this pursuit of, can I try one? Like, these aren't cheap guitars. They're not factory built instruments. They're, very small production. Which led me to finding you at the time. I think you had a G4.
I think so, yes.
That you could, which is, a very different instrument. And I remember this distinctly. You sort of teased me.
I didn't.
You wouldn't let me play it straight away. You
like me, yeah.
You sort of like, these are all the others that we have. And I played them one by one. And we discussed what I liked and didn't like about each one. And then finally I played, a Greenfield. I think I rang you literally the next day to place an order.
I remember that, yeah.
And, lots of painful waiting for it to to come. And then I spent a couple of years with that guitar and loved it. And eventually decided, I want to get a few more bells and whistles. Mm-hmm. So ordered the G2. And that one, that being a custom build, obviously has a lot more options, which I found quite daunting at the time because I've never, normally it's just what wood and what what shape, and that's it. So you kindly helped me decide what it is that I like and don't like. And we ordered it and had a grand unveiling.
I remember that. Was that the one where we had to wait for about 6 hours for it to?
Yes. Yeah.
This guitar came over from Montreal, and Joel and I held a vigil over the cardboard box, just waiting for it to come up to room temperature. And it was a good 7 or 8 hours, I think, until we finally were able to, we touched the box and it was okay, and we touched the case and it was okay. And this was well past closing time. It was like 8 o'clock at night. We finally pulled it out, and what a thing. Gorgeous instrument.
Yeah.
Since that guitar was finished, you have commissioned 2 further instruments from Michael Greenfield.
Yes.
Which kind of makes you a bit of an expert as to the way that Michael works with his clients and the different options that he offers. And I was really keen to get your insight into how the process happened for you.
Sure. So it's interesting because there's been a kind of different experience with the three guitars. With the G2, because I was so new to speccing a custom instrument, it's very daunting. Just the number of parameters that you've got to play with. The internet can be a dangerous place because there's a rabbit hole for everything, and these are the woods that you have to have, and all these kinds of things. Eventually, I went on my ear, basically playing lots and lots of guitars, figuring out what I liked and what I didn't like. And when it came to ordering the classical, that was a very different story.
Yes.
So I'd always played classical since I was a kid. That's what I started with, but I've never actually had a nice classical guitar. Right. I remember once, I think it must have been in my 20s, I went into a snooty classical guitar store, and it was very intimidating. I was like, not worthy of touching them. So I'd never played one, but having obviously been introduced to Michael, we actually ended up travelling together to the Berlin show.
The Holy Grail.
Yes,
right.
And he brought one of the prototype concert classicals with, and he told me the story. He'd been working on it for years of this new design. So I actually got to spend some time with that instrument. I was very lucky that I got to try before I buy, kind of thing. And it was just night and day. It was just a completely different guitar than I was used to. So soon after that, I found myself ordering one. With that one, it's interesting because the options are, there's fewer options that he offers on that.
Right.
It's really the top. The wood choice for that. Michael was generous enough to actually build 2 at the same time.
Oh wow! Okay.
Maybe that speaks to my indecisiveness of not being able to choose anything. But obviously his guitars are very in demand. So, if he builds another one, someone will have it.
It's going to go.
Yeah. So when it came to actually, choosing the one that I wanted, it was a very interesting experience having 2 guitars side by side where only the top is different. And I just found myself gravitating, towards one of them over the other. And then the G3 is a completely different story again. I already had the G2. I was looking for a more kind of intimate instrument,
right?
Because it's a big, it's like a grand piano, and sometimes you want a keyboard, and it's a very different sound. I'd heard Pipo play, and obviously, if I buy a G3, I'll sound like Pipo, right?
Oh, obviously, yeah. Stands to reason.
With that one, I kind of gave him free rein. I said, I know I want a smaller guitar, a G3. Make it special. I like rosewoody sounding guitars. Just because I'm a sucker for lashings of reverb. But yeah, I kind of gave him free rein. I knew that I loved his sound so much that, I'm not really going to be able to go wrong. And, just basically trust him. He knows the materials that he's got. He knows what will work. He knows my playing by now.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, we ended up going for, he had a lovely set of Brazilian rosewood, and I liked the moon spruce. It's quite, I found it quite different to the Adirondack that I've got on the G2.
Right.
Just a kind of sort of bit more mellower, smoother kind of sound, at least to my ear. And then, a few other bells and whistles, the DAG-GAD fan, a few bevels and, fancy dots on the fingerboard and, whatever else is put on there. And that's the most recent addition to the collection.
Joel, I know that you've got a lot of experience with things that have been custom made for you outside of the guitar sphere. How does the experience with Michael Greenfield compare?
That's a good question. I think for me, the experience I've had each time with each guitar is kind of one of surprise. Right. Going into it, you kind of think, "Oh, guitar's a guitar. What can you do?" That kind of changed the first time I played one. And I'd say of the three, the classical probably surprised me the most. Part of it is because I was so used to playing, cheap instruments and was kind of none the wiser as to what a good classical could sound like, let alone a modern classical.
Right.
This is designed very differently to your traditional one. And as a player, you sort of suddenly just hear lots of different things and lots of new things. And with the classical, I found it's almost like a magnifying glass on your playing,
right?
For better or for worse. Mm-hmm. You have to practice a lot more now. But with all three instruments, there's been something about them that's just kind of there's something special that I didn't. I couldn't. It's very hard to imagine it or picture it going in.
It is, isn't it?
You know what a guitar will sound like, but you don't necessarily have an idea like what's the sort of personality of this one going to be like,
right,
until you play it. So the G2 is kind of this like all-encompassing sound that's is very hi-fi but also huge at the same time, which is kind of a unusual combination. The G3 is so sweet but also so piano-like, and again projects so well for such a small instrument. So like with each one, it's been this kind of pleasant surprise of like, oh wow, I can really use this for this particular type of music.
And you visited Michael at his workshop in Montreal as well, haven't you?
Yes, I have a couple of times. So the first time was while he was making the G2. He was hosting. So Michael hosts these concerts every now and then, mostly just to kind of give back to the musical community. And he knew I liked Tony and Tony's music. So he said, "Look, I've got Tony doing a woodshop concert. You're very welcome to come." So, like a lunatic, I flew to Montreal for 24 hours.
Lovely.
And I actually got to see him making the guitar the next day, which was, obviously amazing.
Yes. I don't think a lot of people have had that privilege before. I can't imagine a lot of luthiers that would be happy with the client just sort of sat in the corner of the bench.
No, it was very. I was very surprised. Obviously, he's a busy guy. There's a lot of work that goes into these guitars. He works extremely hard.
Yes.
But he was very generous with his time, and it was just nice to learn more about this new experience as well and what goes into a guitar. And then I've gone and visited a couple more times as well. The coffee's pretty good as well, which helps.
Coffee's superb.
The coffee's
good.
Indeed.
Well, Joel, thank you so much for the invitation. It has been, it's been a really lovely day. I've enjoyed, obviously catching up with you has just been a delight, but also playing these magnificent instruments has been just wonderful. Don't forget that if you'd like me to film your collection for your own personal enjoyment or for this channel, you can get in touch with me via the link down in the description to this video. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay tuned.